Thank you so much for coming to this year's John Coffin Memorial Lecture. I'm Diamond Ashiagbo, and I'm Professor of Law and Director of Research here at the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies. I'm going to start with a couple of boring housekeeping announcements. The first one's actually quite an interesting housekeeping announcement, which is at the end of the formal part of the lecture and the discussion, we will have a reception which will be on the ground floor here in the conference room. There'll be people who lead the way, so those of you who aren't familiar with the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies. And I actually see a lot of people whose faces I don't recognise, which is good, because it suggests some of you here are art historians, not necessarily legal practitioners or legal scholars, which is exactly what we were hoping for. I'd like to start by expressing thanks to a former colleague, Dr. Judith Townend, who was formerly director of the Information Law and Policy Centre here at the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies, and she's moved now to the University of Sussex. But it was Judith who applied to the Coffin Fund last year on behalf of the Institute for us to be able to host this memorial lecture this year. And for me, it's particularly apt that we're hosting this lecture under the auspices of the Coffin Fund. For those of you who don't know about it, this was a fund established in honour by Arthur Charles Coffin, who's an external student at the University of London, graduating with a past degree in arts in 1889. And he established this bequest to provide grants as suitable occasion should arise for lectures on Christian ethics or recent research of historical, literary or scientific interest, a chamber concert or recital by an ensemble or instrumentalist, and literary readings of prose and poetry. So I let you decide into which category this evening's lecture falls. And previous lectures in this cycle held by other institutes of the School of Advanced Study have been on the history of ideas, the history of the book, paleogeography, and Irish studies. Okay. Now, I think tonight's lecture in particular fits in with the broader mission of the School of Advanced Study, of which this institute is one of 9 institutes, in that the mission of SAS, as we call it, not SAS, is to promote and facilitate research, national and international, by international humanities researchers and scholars. And I think there has been a long link between the scholarly traditions of law and humanities, which I see a particular role for this institute in advancing. Very much the mission of the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies since 1947 was to provide a home for legal scholarship, which was a sort of neutral space, neutral as opposed to the distinctive space of practice or specific universities. And I very much see the interdisciplinary work that IELTS can do, bringing together studies in law, society, and humanities, but linking together especially with the other institutes of SAS, the Warburg Institute for Art History, the Institute for Social Research, the Institute of English Studies, and so on. And I can think of no 2 better placed scholars to do that than Linda Mulcahy and Michelle O'Malley. So I'm going to introduce our lecturer and our chair for this evening, and then hand over to them to talk about the substance of this evening. So our speaker, our Coffin Memorial Lecturer this evening is Linda Mulcahy, who's Professor of Law at the London School of Economics, where she's also first director of the LSE's new PhD Academy. Linda's recent work has involved collaboration with this institute, and it's been a project on legal biography. One might also think of it as legal life writing. Some people talk about this research as thinking about lives lived with law, lived through law. And Linda was co-editor with David Sugarman of a book, a special journal issue on this idea of legal biography, which linked up with the LSE's legal biography project of the British Library and of IELTS. More recently, Linda has written a book on the ways in which the design of law courts conditions the enjoyment of due process rights. And she's currently working in a project with architect Emma Rowden, a project funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, on design and due process facilitating participation in the justice system, as well as a project on oral history and legal biography. So what she does there is bring together her many qualifications in law, sociology, history of art and architecture to really infuse a very strong interdisciplinary flavour to her research. So I know her work as a socio-legal scholar working on disputes in a number of contexts such as car distribution industry, NHS, public sector, judicial review, but increasingly she's been working, as I said, this providing excellent, in one scholar we have this excellent bridge between law, humanities and social science scholarship, which I really think is the sort of heart of what I would like to see this doing. Professor Michelle O'Malley is Professor of the History of Art at the Warburg Institute and Deputy Director of the Warburg Institute. She has degrees in art history from Newton College of the Sacred Heart, Boston University and a PhD from the Warburg Institute. Prior to joining the Warburg Institute as Deputy Director last year, Michelle spent a great deal of her career at the University of Sussex, where she was head of the art history department and director of research and knowledge exchange in the School of History, Art History and Philosophy. She was also previously head of education for exhibitions at the Royal Academy of Arts. And amongst Michelle's publications are two books which I think, one in particular interest to lawyers, and one published by Yale University Press on the business of art, contracts and the commissioning process in Renaissance Italy. And what I think would be quite interesting, not to try to compel Michelle and Linda to bring their scholarship together in one evening, but I'm asking Michelle to talk about her own research by way of introducing Linda's lecture on what art history can tell lawyers about their discipline, to give those of us who aren't art historians an introduction to the way in which non-lawyers think about image and text, how art historians engage with issues of law. So I'm going to ask Michelle to give us an introduction to your research.
Thank you very much, Diane. Thank you. In her abstract for this talk, Linda notes that lawyers love a word. And I think it's fair to say that Renaissance historians also love the word when we're lucky enough to have it. Various types of records can tell us a lot about the circumstances of the production of works of art. But no amount of words and text can ever give us information on exactly how works of art came to look as they do. Instead, some of that information is embedded in the objects themselves, the works of art themselves. And more, we, in our history, are coming to trust the visual information of work in works of art as hard evidence, rather than something that's just kind of nice to have on the side of the work. It's hard evidence about things as production practices, original appearance, and location and use. And I'd like to show you what I mean with just a couple of examples. Diamond asked me to chair today because I have worked on contracts, but also because I work on the value of the image as a source of information. In my case, a source of information about how works of art were commissioned and made in the Italian Renaissance, paintings especially. For centuries, long before we thought of artists who starved in garrets as they made works of art that expressed themselves, for centuries before that, artists worked to contract. Their clients told them what to paint, and together they and their clients decided decided the details of the job that would be done. So Renaissance clients, just let me get up so I can do this properly, did not view something like this and decide whether or not they wanted to buy it. Instead, they got together with an artist and drew up something like this, a contract for how the work of art was going to be made. But the one thing, ironically for us, that they rarely wrote down was the subject matter to be painted. And here you have a different contract, but translated. And as you can see here, contracts often record only that the client will tell the painter the subject matter. Here the stipulation merely notes that the images, figures, and frames to be depicted will be detailed to the painter. The words give us no clue that the altarpiece would look like this. It's absolutely filled with figures. And knowing that they were detailed after such aspects as price and deadline were decided helps us with thinking about how the design itself might have been conceived. Other contracts simply note that the painter will make a disegno or a sketch of the altarpiece to be produced. Nothing is said about the nature of the drawing. It's only when we look at surviving such drawings that we see that they typically offered clients a choice. Not the way in which the subject matter would look. That was the painter's purview, and it's in a way why the client went to the painter in the first place. Instead, they were offered a choice about how the framing would look. And I hope you can see here that, you can get a twirly column on a straight one, and here you can get twirly on the bottom, and here you can get different kinds of ornamenti on pilasters. And here, it's fewer choices, and you get ornamenti and like it, but you might want it all the way down on a pilaster, or you might want a pilaster that's supported up like this. That's the kind of choice that was offered to the artist. And we had no idea of that from what the contract said. We could only learn it from the graphic material. Another example of the value of visual information is in the study of workshop operation. Every Renaissance master painter ran a workshop, that is a business, where he employed men and boys at different levels of skill to assist him in production. A text written around 1400 tells us how painters prepared panels, mixed pigments, made their brushes, and things like that. It also implies that design was created by a master, but it has no information on how workshops might be managed. These workshops of many people might be managed to produce numerous paintings at once. We can only come to understand that by looking at pictures, especially at their underdrawings, that is, the drawings underneath the paint, which are visible through infrared technology. Here is Botticelli, having assigned a workshop member to draw a particular devotional image of the Madonna and Child related to one that he had designed earlier. And then we can see him coming in and correcting it. So these, are you seeing? I lost my little web thing. Well, I hope you can see that there are dark lines that delineate the folds of the Virgin's robe over on the left. And here on the right, you can see quite faintly another hand. You see this thumb that comes down here and is flat to the picture plane, and then fingers come down here. Well, a more experienced artist that we think was Botticelli came in and fixed the robe and absolutely fixed the hand by making it properly connected to the arm and drawing it more in perspective, and then put a wind instrument into the child's hand. Now, there's no iconography of the child holding a flute. This was probably a joke on Botticelli's part, and it was always meant to be painted out as it is in the finished work, where the child is holding a pomegranate. It was, however, probably good for a laugh while teaching. Other images make clear the balance of collaboration and control that Botticelli practiced in the workshop, very like this. And it's difficult to imagine that at all, being encapsulated in words. We need to look at the images to understand what's going on. These different kinds of visual data show us what went on, but we never could have guessed it from the surviving text. Recognizing the value of purely visual information has enriched and made more nuanced our understanding of the processes of painting in the Renaissance. The visual underlines the fact that words alone are far from sufficient evidence for understanding practice. But now let's turn to Linda and have a sense of the value of visual for law.
thanks very much. I always assume that nobody will come to my lecture, so it's really nice to see such a well-stocked room, so thank you very much for coming out. I was really delighted to be able to deliver the John Coffin lecture tonight. Firstly, because the lecture is dedicated to a journeyman blacksmith whose son was able to study at the University of London, and widening participations in that field that I care really passionately about. And secondly, the bequest that allowed the lecture series to be set up was a reaction to the growing intensity of academic specialisation, and a reminder that we should not lose sight of music and the arts in our education system. As a scholar who's attempted to work at the interface of a number of disciplines in my time, this of course is music to my ears. And I ought to say that although my interests in law across time sound quite disparate, what really brings them together for me is wanting to understand how ordinary people perceive and experience the law, the phenomenology of law, if you like. So I do have an art history master's because I needed, when I became interested in architecture, to learn a little bit more about the methodology of the visual arts. I wouldn't call myself an art historian, and I just say that because I know there are some art historians in the room, so I'm basically saying be gentle on me, okay? I've got the degree, but knowing a little bit about the subject, I appreciate can be very dangerous. So the perspective from which I work is a socio-legal perspective. And socio-legal studies is still a relatively young intellectual movement, but it's already had a number of transformations in how we conceptualise the essence and boundaries of the field. And members of the socio-legal community have always cast their net broadly in their exploration of the intersections between law and other disciplines. The top journals in the field have set themselves up as fora in which discussions about such connections can be interrogated and constructed boundaries between law and other disciplines questioned. To take one example, since it was established in 1974, the Journal of Law and Society's editors have published and commissioned a series of articles looking at relationships between law and psychology, anthropology, sociology, economics, film, science and literature, as well as critical legal studies. The goal of this lecture is to investigate a nascent juncture between law and another field of study which has not been extensively discussed within mainstream legal circles to date, the relationship between law, art and the image. The visual turn in late 20th century scholarship has been much discussed across the social sciences and humanities, and it's been claimed that visual studies, like socio-legal studies, has the potential to uncover connections between parts of the university that has historically been disjointed. In response to this phenomenon, a number of subdisciplines have emerged with the specific goal of explaining the visual dynamics of academic fields of inquiries. We now talk of visual criminology, visual anthropology, visual geography, visual sociology, and visual culture more generally, as well as their critical intellectual histories. These labels actually mask a multitude of meanings about the significance of the image, ranging from new ways of defining fields of inquiries to what constitutes a legitimate source for research, to discussions of image production or visual prompts as a data collection method. There have always been strong visual components to law and the legal system, which is important not to forget in the excitement of new approaches and questions now being forged. Visual images of named or identifiable English judges have a particularly long history, beginning in the 14th century with effigies and other funeral monuments, including paintings, etchings, and since the 19th century, photograph and carte de visite. The architecture of law courts, the ubiquity of images of justiciar in the civic sphere, the use of legal emblems and other illuminations in legal textbooks, the wearing of the gown and the wig, the ceremony and ritual associated with the procession of assize judges have also ensured that the performance of law has long been rendered spectacular. The turn to the visual is, however, of particular importance in contemporary legal systems. The proliferation of images and the saturation of social and legal spaces facilitated by new technologies in the latter part of the 20th century has the potential to create fundamental shifts in the way that people experience law and legal phenomena and communicate about them within and across societies. These technologies have quite literally changed the way that legal subjects and the legal system are seen. photographs of events surrounding trials, the widespread use of surveillance cameras, multimedia displays, visual links in courts, the use of iPads by jurors, and computer simulations have facilitated a new invasion of the visual into law's realm. As Richard Sherwin has argued, these changes are causing the shape and texture of the legal imagination to undergo radical change. It seems to me that artists are also increasingly interested in contemporary representations of the legal system. It's lovely to see Kerry Young in the audience because she will... Oh, wrong slide, of course. There we go. Kerry, I was meant to start with an image that's a still from your recent film that you've done on the Palais de Justice. So Kerry's work on the Palais de Justice, on contracts, on notions of jurisdiction, Leonora Tassander's work with city solicitors and Durham Law School, the famous art collection gathered by Albie Sachs with the Constitutional Court in South Africa, and the use of art in transitional justice projects all speak to the many ways in which law is capable of wielding power, offering hope, and hiding its complicity in abuses. These developments and opportunities have not gone unnoticed. It's been argued that the visual dimension of socio-legal studies has been established as a significant topic of study, and that books and journals in the field have regularly published work which has a distinct emphasis on the role and place of the visual in the legal. The work of scholars such as Cornelia Weisman, Peter Goodrich, Des Manderson, Les Moran, Costas Desinas, Martin J. Lynn Need has also done much to really scope out this field for us. Another marker of this interest is the increasing use of the terms visual jurisprudence or visual prudence, and the number of articles which now draw on and include images that are published in legal journals. But despite this evidence of a burgeoning interest in the visual, it's been argued that the Legal Academy has yet to seriously engage with what an infusion of the visual, or picturing, means for a discipline that is predominantly preoccupied with words and logic. So this lecture seeks to explore this claim and more specifically to consider what a visual turn in socio-legal studies might look like or mean. It looks in particular at still images and artworks which seek to represent user perspectives on the workings of the legal system. So my talk this evening has four components to it. After this introduction, I want to move on to consider the nature of law's relationship with text and image. Then consider the implications of the visual turn for legal researchers. And then I want to finish with a note of caution for those who might be filled with hope about the visual turn in socio-legal studies. I don't think it's quite as great as it has been made out to be. So let me start then with law's relationship with the image. Law's relationship with the image has a long history, as I've already suggested. And doctrinal scholars have long pondered how rights over visual media are acquired, fine art is rendered authentic, relationships between dealers and artists regulated, and ownership established or transferred in the guise of copyright, property law, or contract law. What characterises these predominantly black letter accounts of the ways in which law and art interact is an interest in the commodification of creativity, or the efficient and fair functioning of art markets, rather than engaging with what works of art can reveal about law. And the focus here is on how law regulates the production, labelling, ownership and exchange of images. Elsewhere, legislation and case law has been mobilised to control works of art considered to be obscene and liable to corrupt the morals of those who gaze upon them. Art in all these contexts is considered the thing at the centre of disputes and legal analysis, but an element that can largely be divorced from an appreciation or understanding of the image itself. These practices represent visions of the relationship between the two disciplines in which law orders art, it disciplines it. The focus on rights, transaction and doctrine also severely limits lawyers' appreciation of the significance of art for law. It seems to me that legal scholars can ask a host of other questions about how the perceptions and understanding of law and legal phenomena are experienced, constructed, conditioned, mediated or challenged through exposure to images. Just as art historians have questioned the sensory bias of their discipline towards sight and its tendency to disengage from a richer experience of place and context, so too there has been an increasing call for a recognition of the importance of a jurisprudence of the senses and the need to explore the phenomenology of law by attending to the full range of sensory dynamics beyond the text. By facilitating a broader engagement with experiences of images and their regulation, it's argued that we begin to consider how spatial experience, scale, depth and tactility inform experiences of substantive and procedural law and legal rituals. These calls remind us of the danger of blindness, deafness, anosmia, ageusia, or the loss of the haptic on the ways that law is lived. Perhaps most importantly, they commonly compel us to attend to the particular experience rather than the general rules so loved by lawyers. It's been widely contended that there's been a general reluctance on the part of lawyers to treat the image seriously and ponder on the work that images do in the legal system. For Les Moran, the many pages of law journals, monographs and textbooks demonstrate that the complex interface between law and visual culture continues to be marginalised in legal scholarship. Discussing reactions to his own work, he's argued, in my experience from giving papers and talking to lawyers and judges, reactions range from bewilderment, disbelief and passive-aggressive indifference to more open attacks and withering of denunciations that dismiss work that touches on the visual aspects of law as esoteric, trivial, not law. The nature of the relationship between legal text and the image is undoubtedly a complex one. It's been argued that lawyers' obsession with the word and neglect of the visual can be traced to the ways in which legal methodology has become inextricably bound up with the text as the most legitimate source of concepts relating to justice, to the exclusion of the image. This reification of the text has been explained by reference to three main factors or arguments. The first of these is the link between the text and the divine. Peter Goodrich has argued that from a position in which it was expected that the will of God would reveal itself through things that could be seen, such as ordeal by fire, in time it was the text which was taken to reveal the wisdom of the deity or their disciples and was treated as an ultimate source of law. By way of example, a foundational myth in Judeo-Christian thinking describes the point at which Moses brings law from God to the people on tablets of stone, and is said to mark the transition from unwritten to written law. When the first law schools were established in the 12th century, the focus on the importance of studying ancient legal manuscripts served to further marginalise the role of the image in examining concepts of justice. This conceptualisation of the text as more authentic than the image was further facilitated in the Protestant Reformation, during which images began to be seen as too worldly, too sensual and potentially corrupt. Dezenus and Need have argued that the legitimation of iconophobia in this period facilitated the further construction of a binary divide between the image and the text, in which the image was linked to imagination, to creativity, to playfulness, and legal text to control, discipline and sobriety. In this context, the achievement of iconoclasm can be traced to both the destruction of images and the fundamental alteration of their meaning in society. At the same time as becoming inextricably entangled with the concept of law, the written word has enjoyed a much closer association with the political elite and concepts of progress. The history of systems of writing evidences a constant link being made between the invention of writing and the placing of knowledge and control in the hands of those we would now identify as having high cultural and social capital. Spiesel, for instance, has claimed that it's commonly assumed that it was literacy rather than image making that made advanced culture possible. And this association is constantly reinforced by Western education systems, in which there's much focus on learning to read, write and analyse the text, and hardly any focus on learning how to read pictures. In this context, commentators have also drawn attention to the ways in which images have come to be identified as a medium for communicating with the illiterate. These associations have served to invoke a strong cultural disposition towards the view that thinking can only be accomplished with words because language is taken to be the primary medium of thought. These various developments have resulted in certain legal attributes being prized above others. It remains the case in contemporary legal education that lawyers are valued for their ability to produce chronological written sequences, to synthesize ideas expressed in words, and to be logical and balanced. Words are seen as vehicles for intellectual thinking that string concepts together in orderly and reasoned succession, what Manderson has called tyrannically linear succession. The mark of the writer may not have the same sensual appeal as the mark of the artist, but to the majority of lawyers, the text is considered a more reliable and predictable way of expressing ideas about justice. The results of these various tensions between law and art have led to what Dezinus has called an economy of permitted images in the public sphere, in which visual depictions of law are permitted by the political and legal elite, but must conform to certain expectations about the sorts of messages portrayed. Now, I've taken some examples of this from a courthouse, criminal courthouse that is closest to us, the Old Bailey. I think they're really representative of images that we see across the civic sphere and across courthouses in Europe. Because rather ironically, what the economy of permitted images commissioned by public bodies tends to emphasise is the importance of the text. Here we see Fortitude, the Recording Angel and Truth by Pomeroy, which is over the main door at the Old Bailey, with the recording angel writing on a long scroll of paper. A second allegorical figure by Pomeroy on the same courthouse with a quill and a book. And a third allegorical figure with the familiar sword, but also an open book. So the economy of permitted images actually make reference constantly, it seems, in the legal sphere to the text. In a similar vein, in Moran's work on judicial portraits, he argues that photographs and paintings produced by the state play a double role in identity formation by fashioning the identity of the individual sitter and the idea of the institution. Though the sitter's image, institutional values and virtues are not only made, but are made visible, public and accessible. Resnick and Curtis have also drawn attention to the ways in which medieval portraits of corrupt judges being punished provided opportunities for authorities to make clear that judges were subservient to, rather than independent of their paymaster. Conversely, there are many examples of the state attempting to regulate images depicting judges and the legal system when produced independently of state actors. By way of example, the banning of photography in English courts in 1925 can be understood as a way of keeping legal image production away from the mass media, and the Daily Mail in particular, but most notably the working classes. Elsewhere, Asimov discusses early attempts to regulate the film industry in the United States in order to ensure that depictions of legal professionals were good ones, rather than we weren't allowed immoral lawyers. So, what are the implications of the visual turn for sociolegal studies? The study of representations of the justice system has enormous potential for sociolegal scholars, most of which, I would argue, have not yet been fulfilled. And I'd like to discuss three particular points today. Firstly, the ways in which focus on images allows us to study law from the bottom up, to develop a grounded visual jurisprudence, or visual jurisprudence of everyday life. Secondly, the potential for historical images to facilitate revisionist histories of law. And thirdly, consideration of the way in which images prepare us for law in the everyday. The possibility of grounded visual jurisprudence has been anticipated for some time by the new art history movement, distinguishing themselves from traditional studies of art history that focused on style, technique and high culture. Proponents of visual culture and the new art history that emerged in the 1970s has demonstrated a new democratic impulse by paying attention to forms of art and image making that has previously been ignored. This finds expression in the increasing willingness to take all manifestations of our visual environment seriously, not only those deliberately created for aesthetic effects. By way of example, Gillian Rose includes discussions of paintings, photographs, films, televised soaps and adverts in her well-known book on visual methodologies. This potential has more recently been recognised by sociolegal scholars, who have added comic books, cartoons, children's books and newspaper sketches to their exploration of the way that legal subjects see law. In my work on street art, I've argued that street art is another visual resource that can be added to this list. This art form questions many of the things held dear by lawyers, art collectors and curators, the notion of the gallery, or ownership of creative outputs, whilst also challenging and being captured by commercialisation of creativity it claims to critique. This image, called the contract, is one such example of the sort of image to which we might turn to explore the interface between the legal system, the phenomenology of law, and common sense morality. It was stencilled on the side of hoardings on Christina Street, Shoreditch, at the edge of the Square Mile in the City of London. I did an ethnographic study of street art in Shoreditch, and this has been destroyed. There are two men who go around in a van who are employed by the council, and they decide what is art and what's graffiti. I did ask if I could go around in the van with them, which I think would have been the best project ever, but I wasn't allowed to. But anyway, the property developers and the two men in the van decided that this was graffiti, and so it was destroyed. It actually was part of a mural that covered 3 walls. And one of the wonderful things about people that are interested in street art is that actually the archive of this art ends up on blocks and nowhere else because it gets destroyed. So it's quite important to catch these things quickly. If you see anything to do with law, just let me know, and I'll be down there with my camera. Okay, so this actually, as some of you may recognise, it depicts Jimi Hendrix as a young musician, inexperienced in the ways of the music business, signing a contract in America, which his fans have since characterised as having grossly unfair terms. It turns out, when you look into it, that apparently Jimi Hendrix, obviously under the influence of all sorts of things that weren't paracetamol, signed a lot of contracts, and when he became a very well-known star, his record label had to go around and try and find all these contracts that he had signed while he was in a different zone. But this was one of them that became quite famous. The work is actually full of reference points in popular culture. It's inspired by the work of French illustrator Jean Girard, best known for his graphic novels, who produced a similar image for a French edition of a Jimi Hendrix album, if any of you are wondering why this isn't on your English version. The fact that it tells a familiar story about contracts enforced in a different legal jurisdiction draws our attention to stories of abuse that are familiar across legal systems. It points to one way in which we might begin to find the international in the local. The artist who created this work is aware that street art has commercial value in the marketplace, but like many street artists, he chooses to be an occasional outlaw, to mount his work illegally and for free on walls owned by others in an attempt, he would claim, to beautify the city. He does so in the expectation that others will alter or destroy his work. Though some of the street artists I've spoken to now talk about curating and restoring their work, once it's been altered by another, it's generally accepted that you have no moral right to object to others pasting over, whitewashing or altering your work, not least because you're likely to have done it to other artists in your time. The possible moral conundrum is that there's a commercial premium for artists who mount their work without the permission of the owners of all production, making citizen journalism a reality and engendering protest and dissent within and across jurisdictional boundaries. At its most exciting, it allows the production and management of images of law to be placed in the hands of the populace, rather than ageing academics like me who think they're hip because they've undertaken an ethnographic study of street art in Shoreditch. So turning to the possibility of the image facilitating revisionist socio-legal histories. It is possible that many legal scholars interested in the image are most likely, it's noticeable that most legal scholars who are interested in the image tend to turn to the contemporary, to film, the internet or graphic novels in their explanation of the interface between law and the image, when there is actually so much work to be done on fine art, photography and other historical sources, as Michelle hinted at. Using the image as a source rather than a sideshow offers us the possibility of revisiting histories of socio-legal subjects who were not considered important enough to leave a significant trace on legal records. and I offer two examples in this context. The first of these relates to an image of a public gallery in a court that I discovered after writing a paper on this issue for the Journal of Law and Society. I was drawn to visual depictions of the public gallery in courts by the fact that written records of court proceedings tell us very little about the people who sit in public galleries, except when they misbehave and they're mentioned in the context of the court being cleared or people being held in contempt because they're making too much noise in the public gallery. A content analysis of the London Times since its first issue showed that when trials are discussed, the focus of reports is on the main characters, on judges, defendants, barristers and witnesses. So why bother with the public gallery? From a feminist perspective, the impact of written accounts that remain is to render women, who until the 20th century could only appear in the well of the court as defendant or witness, largely invisible. Accounts of the public gallery that have been written by historians have tended to characterise attendance in the galleries as sport or entertainment. Female spectators are commonly described as having an insatiable and unhealthy appetite for crime. In this context, I would argue that images such as Francesca Netti's at the Assizes tell us something new about female spectators. This could easily be a painting about the theatre or the opera, but it's not. It's a study of an Italian courtroom. And what I find particularly interesting about it is that in contrast to remaining textual accounts of trials, the public gallery is not marginalised, it's placed at centre stage. And Nettie undoubtedly acknowledges the frivolity of gendered performances in the public sphere of the late 19th century, that women were not just expected to go to trials to see, but also to be seen. But we also see women intent on listening to the proceedings, who are clearly engaged by them. We know from crude cartoons and sketches in publications aimed at the working classes that women attended court in large numbers during this era. We're able to glean from paintings such as Abraham Solomon's Waiting for the Verdict that the attendance of women in the courtroom was increasingly frowned upon, that some paintings of the era produced a social code which made it clear that women should not enter the courtroom, even to be spectators. This then is a rare fine art depiction which suggests that women might be motivated to attend court for rational reasons, to educate themselves in the ways of the law, or to perform a civic duty in rendering the trial open in the way that Jeremy Bentham anticipated. There are no legal texts in which this possibility is revealed, suggested, or hinted at. My second example involves a type of image that might also contribute, it seems to me, to a revisionist history of 19th century criminals. Art historians have tended to treat mugshots and photographs of crime scenes as the archetypal form of documentary photography that sits at the far end of a spectrum, which has artistic photography at the other end. Criminologists have tended to see the mugshot as a prime example of the criminal body rendered docile by a new form of disciplinary regime. But what happens if those of us interested in agency of subversion in the commonplace of the law silence the art historian and criminologist for a moment and ask them to look at the images produced by the police with a different eye? What happens if we ask whether mugshots always sit at the documentary end of the visual spectrum? What happens if in place of docility we look for spirit and ambiguity? What happens if in place of degradation we look for the honorific stance, which is more familiar in middle-class portraiture? What happens if instead of the ugly we look for beauty? What happens if we ask who took this photograph? When I look at Michael Lavery, I see no signs of a man rendered docile. I see a man who's been captured by the camera, but not fully captured by the state. A third project for socio-legal scholars might be a consideration of the ways in which images prepare people for a particular type of encounter with the law. In particular, how art becomes an aspect of legal culture which is anchored in daily practices or facilitates learned habits of interpretation that go without saying. One wonders, for instance, how the work done by the statue shown here might frame one's encounter with the legal system. Does it render a particular type of performance before the law more likely? What are the conditions of possibility that make it legitimate for Her Majesty's Court Service to spend public money on this particular representation of Justitia? The litigants who attend this court may be facing criminal charges that could lead to their long-term incarceration. They may be pursuing a personal injury claim which has caused long-term harm. But they are characterised here as squabbling children who are behaving irrationally and in need of being brought to their senses by a figure of authority. As litigants approach the court and glance upon this statue, how does it prepare them for their trial? Does this statue help to dignify their presence in the temple of justice, or does it just make them angry? In their different ways, the images I have shown you draw our attention to the many ways in which the image wields its power and offers up ambiguous ideas about law and justice. Unlike the legal text, which must be read line after line in a particular order, these images of law are more anarchic. They all contain and encourage ambiguity. They can be entered at any place in the visual field, and the sense of a prescribed order in reading verbal text is absent. This ambiguity is a crucial part of our engagement with the artwork or image because it causes us to ponder and to reflect in new ways. It may even have the potential to reveal what the elegantly written legal text does not about the violence of law. Manderson has argued that, like sound, the vision draws out memories and associations which may offer incomparable and divergent paths to interpretation of law and legal phenomena. When we observe the image, we may well grasp the simultaneous presence of the many disparate things within one frame. The result is that art has the potential to reveal a multiplicity of otherness and differences, which are for the most part silenced in legal texts. Elsewhere, artworks have been used to implicate the justice system in the abuse of human rights, or to expose the ways in which idealised visions of justice in public art serves the needs of the elite. Artists depict depictions of Justitia as black, communist, working class, or in need of counsel, and the outrage that has been caused by these has served to expose taken for granted assumptions that Justitia is of high status, apolitical, and white. So I'd like to end on a note of caution about the visual turn in socio-legal studies, because despite the considerable potential of this field and the significant array of work that's already been undertaken, there are still important questions to pose about it. To begin with, the suggestion that a visual turn in socio-legal studies has been firmly established needs to be questioned. Though charts, tables and occasional diagrams have characterised numerous articles published in leading socio-legal journals from their inception, the use of other images has been much slower to respond. For many years, inclusion of images amounted to no more than illustrations in advertisements for books, other journals and academic events generally, which were contained in the final pages of an issue. I know this because I've actually physically gone through lots of the major socio-legal journals, which it's more and more difficult to do now because they're all online, so you don't have hard copy. But Jules, the Institute, does, so thank you for that. So we end up with cheesy ads. That's all. Those are all the images that we have in a number of socio-legal journals in their first decades. The first image to appear in the body of an article in Social and Legal Studies and the Law and Society Review was published in 1995, and as late as 2011 for the Journal of Law and Society. Even more ironic is the number of articles about visual depictions of justice that contain no images at all. And there are many, especially in the field of law and film. By way of example, of the 4 accounts of the banning of photography in English courts by the Criminal Justice Act of 1925, only one essay, one written by Linda Need, an art historian, has images within it and attempts to explain the moral panic about the press and female spectators as a reaction to the type of photographs actually being produced. Where visual sources or representations of law have been discussed, this is most likely to have occurred in relation to the depiction of lawyers in the flourishing subgenre of law and film. Though scholars in this field tend to focus more on the interface of plot, moving image and representations of lawyers than they do on the image alone. They're also rather lacking, it seems to me, in methodological reflection about the work that the image is doing. So much argumentation in this genre continues to be produced in the form of text rather than text and stills. We also need to be cautious about how we approach the interface between law and the image and the methodologies we employ. Socio-legal scholars have quite rightly been criticised in the past for their parasitic tendencies, for taking from other disciplines without engaging in the theory of methods employed by them, or what it is that might be given back by socio-legal studies to other disciplines. Significantly, this is also a criticism that's been made of visual studies, which brings together those interested in a particular type of source rather than a particular set of methodologies or theoretical frameworks. For Elkins, an interest in visual studies is all too easy to express, while particulars about the ways in which visual analysis might be undertaken have been much more loosely interpreted. In his words, visual culture cobbles methods, subjects and texts from various disciplines and calls the collection visual culture. This is what I call the magpie theory of interdisciplinarity. In it, a visual culture scholar spends time arranging the seductive pieces lifted from different places, all the while imagining that the project of gathering and arranging is a formative element of interdisciplinarity. Many uses of images by lawyers form yet another example of the consignment of the image to a lowly place in the legal hierarchy of sources, of interest for its ability to merely illustrate a point like a quotation. Significantly, the arguments being pursued in these works would have worked equally well if the image had not been included. Much less frequently are images examined in their own terms as complex representations or stimulants. Little attention is paid to the conventions of art history and the analysis of images, including accounts of the detail of the images, its size, materials used, who it was made by and when, contextual research about how it was used or received at the time of production in subsequent decades, as well as the mobility and cultural afterlife of production in terms of the journey made by the work. Although there are some exemplars of this approach in socio-legal journals, one like Des Manderson's work in particular, it remains relatively rare for the image to be treated as having an explanatory framework or interpretive possibilities in its own right. So, in closing, it would seem that the image has yet to be set free in the world of socio-legal studies and its power fully realised. Thank you.